You are listening to the Pedagogy Primer podcast. I'm Mark Gallimore, Director for the Center for Online Learning and Innovation at Canisius College in Buffalo, New York. This podcast is a multi-episode introduction to teaching in higher education. Today's episode is part one of a two-part discussion focused on internet-based asynchronous discussions as tools and spaces for interaction between students and professors. In this part, we'll look at some basic considerations for how, why, and in what ways you might incorporate asynchronous discussion in your face-to-face, online, or hybrid undergraduate or graduate course. As usual, you can find the relevant links and other resources in show notes. And for other helpful tips and resources for teaching and learning, go to canisius.edu/COLI. You probably know what asynchronous discussions are, even if you don't associate them with that education jargony term. Basically, it's conversation via a message board, comment thread, or discussion forum on the internet. Asynchronous discussions are one of the most commonly used tools in online teaching. Students in different parts of the world can have conversations with their instructor or fellow students that take place over hours, days, or even weeks. Participants can read each other's posts and post their own input at any hour of the day, regardless of who else is also using, viewing, or posting in the discussion topic. This is in contrast to synchronous discussions, such as the traditional in-classroom conversation or web conferencing using a video communications platform like Zoom, WebEx, or Skype. While asynchronous discussions are important in online courses and programs, face-to-face courses can and do benefit by them as well. Professors and students can have or continue conversations via the web between classroom sessions. Those of us who teach face-to-face classes tend to make the comparison between online asynchronous discussions and face-to-face classroom discussions, and that's often helpful, but it can also limit our sense of possibility with the online variety. As history professor Kevin Gannon points out, the pace, spontaneity, and other characteristics of a face-to-face classroom discussion can't be replicated on a message board. But face-to-face conversations often preclude deeper analysis and more careful contributions that can be promoted in asynchronous discussions. So before seriously considering asynchronous discussions, try to suspend any preconceptions you may bring from your classroom experiences. In practice, an instructor usually establishes a discussion with a prompt of some sort. For example, this may be a question concerning a class reading. Then, students can reply to this initial prompt, as well as to each other. An instructor moderates this ongoing set of related conversations, interjects occasional comments or further questions as needed, and can assess students based on the quality of their participation. This is the internet, so participants aren't simply limited to posting simple text messages. While I won't go into the details of this in this episode, those contributing to an asynchronous discussion can often enrich text commentary with still images, videos, or any other kind of media available on the web. Plus, your students can record and post audio or video responses or replies instead of text. Asynchronous discussions can take place in a variety of places on the web. Some faculty use popular productivity discussion tools such as Slack, while still others might use social media or message board functions in Google Groups. Each of these might provide distinct advantages or experiences that are particularly relevant to a course or its substance. But most faculty are going to opt for the discussion tool set within their learning management system. Here at Canisius, that happens to be D2L, but almost all LMSs have some sort of place for asynchronous discussion. There are specific advantages to using the LMS. If you use other tools or spaces within the LMS, you can often integrate discussions into modules or lessons with other content and streamline assessment of student contributions with grading and feedback tools. Most LMSs allow you to quickly set up separate discussion spaces or threads for designated small groups of students, so having a small group discussion can be considerably less of a chore using an LMS. Some LMSs have a quick microphone or webcam recording function built in so students can rapidly post audio or video comments without having to deal with third-party recorders. Message boards within LMSs are typically walled gardens so that only class members can read or participate within them. So you needn't worry about distracting or inappropriate commentary from the rest of the world within your online class. For course content, the most common scenario for an assessed message board discussion is the following. At the beginning of the week or unit, the professor posts a prompt question. This asks students to reply in writing to a specific question that probably concerns accompanying reading or video content, assigned within the same lesson or weekly module. The instructions for the discussion state that students must respond in some way to the initial prompt by a certain day and time, for example, perhaps Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Then, students must reply to, say, 2 other students' initial posts by perhaps Thursday at 5 p.m. There may even be a third round of replies required before the week is out. In the following week, the class does the same procedure over again with a different discussion prompt. College professors have known for a long time that students can learn a lot in discussions with one another, especially with a moderator providing prompting and direction. Compared to activities like lectures or viewing video, discussions in whatever mode or medium can enable students to build a sense of community. Like any teaching method, online asynchronous discussions have drawbacks and advantages that need to be considered when creating these for your course. They are usually a part of asynchronous online courses because the asynchronous requirement for the course means message board discussions are the most obvious choice for student-to-student interaction. But they can be a strong component of face-to-face courses as well, perhaps replacing or augmenting some solitary or less interactive forms of learning, such as watching videos or writing assignments that only the instructor reads. As I said earlier, asynchronous discussions share some characteristics with classroom conversations, but the two modes aren't simply direct replacements for each other. A face-to-face or hybrid course may benefit by having both kinds of discussion. A really good classroom discussion, perhaps among majors in the discipline, establishes a rapid tempo where students are able to move fairly quickly through even complicated materials. In a text discussion, there's no eye contact or ability to communicate through gestures, facial expression, voice inflection, or laughter. Asynchronous discussions that develop as multiple threads under an overarching topic are really several separate discussions, and students may struggle to make connections between different ideas raised by their peers. Hearing this, you may immediately prefer the classroom variety, a more fast-paced, iterative conversation where you can interject comments at any time you choose. Admittedly, if you plan to replace classroom conversation directly, you will need to revise or perhaps devise new expectations. But all this isn't to argue for the inherent superiority of face-to-face conversation over online. Because after all, there's things online asynchronous discussions can do that face-to-face discussions cannot, or frankly do poorly. And some of the common complaints about online text discussions really have parallel problems commonly experienced in classrooms too. Since participants cannot see each other, make eye contact, or judge the tone of other participants, extra care is needed in composing posts. This isn't necessarily a drawback. These are skills worth fostering in students anyhow. It seems clear that at least for some time longer, students will need to communicate professionally, with tact and cultivated tone in whatever field they find themselves in after graduation. In general, text-based asynchronous discussions can allow students a platform to capitalize on or practice some communication skills that don't generally contribute to face-to-face or web conference discussions. Students can expect to practice good writing skills. Message board conversations allow students time to think before replying to your prompt, or each other, and this, if properly stipulated, may encourage more critical responses. If in other assignments we don't worry so much about students writing too much, in discussions you may find you need to teach students to write efficient and concise prose rather than wordy, repetitious, or rambling text. In online text discussions, students have a record of the discussion, likely stronger than even the best of their note-taking in a classroom discussion, that they can review for further work in class. If you invite experts from outside the class or school to participate in a class discussion, it's easier for them as they needn't attend class at a particular time and place. In online asynchronous discussions, everyone's post is delivered in basically the same format. The conversation does not privilege those who speak louder or more frequently. Even if some students neglect good netiquette and resort to large, bold-faced or colored fonts, they simply cannot interrupt other students when the latter contribute. So asynchronous discussions offer a special opportunity to hear from those who might be, for various reasons, facing particular challenges in classroom discussions. Broadly speaking, most classroom discussions in face-to-face courses privilege those with skills, confidence, and preference for impromptu public speaking. You know how this goes. You prompt students. Several in the room are eager or willing to reply, having given the matter a few seconds' thought. These can be students who are prepared by reading the assigned text, or those just relying on intuition and quick thinking to get a participation credit. Students have a tendency to respond to the professor rather than consider or respond to comments by other students, and many face-to-face discussions become a turn-taking exercise. Unless you enact a system to compel others to participate, many students are content to remain silent, although perhaps interjecting one or two comments for the participation points. We might assume the last type of student may be inattentive or lazy, but they may simply prefer to think carefully about a matter before offering a perspective on it. And most experienced professors can ruefully confirm that the most talkative or extroverted of students do not always make the most valuable contributions. By contrast, online asynchronous discussions favor reflection, that key element of the Jesuit Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. All students have much more time to compose an initial reply to a post, and those students who favor careful reflection before commenting have plenty of time to do so. They can even save a draft and post it the next day after reviewing and revising. With one or more rounds of replies, responding to other students' inputs instead of just the professor can be an explicit feature of asynchronous discussions. Periodically, instructors who teach some combination of face-to-face, hybrid, or online courses at the same school notice that some students who might not be talkative or assertive in classroom become talkative, so to speak, or more likely to contribute in asynchronous discussions. This is normal and often beneficial. If you have both asynchronous and synchronous discussions in your class, be on the lookout for this. Let students carry their weight where they're strongest or more comfortable making good contributions. At the same time, consider nudging students to contribute where they are less comfortable, perhaps somehow incentivizing them to do so. Your course can be an opportunity for them to capitalize on their way of communicating while building strength in areas where they are frankly weaker. A few moments ago, I described the typical asynchronous discussion, which involves the professor posing a prompt and students replying first to that prompt early in the week and then to each other later in the week. This organization is great for a lot of classes and a lot of circumstances. If it works for you, keep doing it. But there's also a lot of other ways you can organize asynchronous discussions that may be a better fit for your class or even just for a particular lesson or learning objective. Many are just variations or combinations of each other. Here's some possibilities. The simplest variation is probably just to have a longer time frame for an individual discussion than just 1 week. Obviously, the length of time is dependent on the prompt. For example, you can ask students to periodically revisit a conversation or topic as new concepts are revealed in a series of lessons. Have students generate discussion questions or review questions and hand these in to you. Then, select a few of them, the best questions, and post them to a class discussion area the following week. That may save you time and energy and help your students learn by having to craft good discussion prompts themselves. Have a prompt which requires students to do a bit of searching on their own, perhaps to find an example of a concept out on the internet or within a web-based database, or even something they digitally photograph. They post that example and offer commentary on how it relates to, for example, course content or concepts. Then, the discussion prompt also obliges students to respond to each other's contribution in accordance with some instructions. For example, I may have students go to a digital database of historical advertising to look for 2 examples of old newspaper or magazine advertisements. Each student comments on one of their own choices and then, in a reply to another student, comments on the second example provided by that student. Establish teams where students work together to craft responses to a discussion question. This results in fewer messages for you to read and grade. You'll need to keep teams small and probably create specific guidelines for collaborating in teams. If you have a large class, you can offer discussion options. For example, the broader subject that week might be the modern television economy, and there can be 2 or 3 discussion topics. One might focus on streaming services, another on traditional networks, and a third on premium cable networks. Each student can choose to discuss whichever topic interests them after doing some relevant research or reading first. As with a lot of web-based teaching methods, preparation for asynchronous discussions is probably most of the work involved for professors. Spend time to craft careful prompts that foster meaningful discussion where students can write original initial responses and replies to each other at some length. Avoid questions that can really only elicit very short replies or do not offer much room for conversation. But then, don't ask questions that are so broad that students either must inappropriately generalize or write several pages of text. An exception might be if you purposefully want students to write what amounts to an essay and then discuss the resulting essays, for example, in a peer review scenario. If you are considering an asynchronous discussion that is optional, perhaps as an extra credit assignment, decide if more than 3 students will participate. If not, the discussion may not really involve a lot of interaction or work like you imagined. Equally important to prompts, you should craft general instructions that help students participate in online discussions. Tell students to read, watch, or listen to these before the first discussion. Basically, this could include days and times where they are expected to post. For example, my students might be required to post an initial contribution on Tuesday by 5 p.m. and then a reply or two by Friday at 5 p.m. These deadlines establish consistency for each discussion and help students manage their own workload. But in many discussions, there may not be a single right answer or way to state an answer. Some answers are clearly better than others, though. State explicitly your expectations. Here's some examples. Stay on topic. Be original. Simple yes, no, or verbatim agreement with a previous post is insufficient. Go beyond cut and paste recitation. Consider the question and compose a thoughtful answer beyond simply retelling what the source said. Go beyond speculation or unsupported arguments and incorporate evidence from course content or other reputable sources. Make heretofore unnoticed or unstated connections between course concepts or between course concepts and media outside the course. Bringing in outside material, including things you might have read or engaged with in another class, is fine, but make it relevant to the topic at hand. Perhaps pose an intelligent question rather than a statement based on critical reading of course content. If you can describe how close analysis of our subject leaves you with a good question that we may or may not be able to answer in the context of the course, that's a potentially good answer, too. Clearly, asynchronous discussions have particular characteristics that can make them valuable to online asynchronous courses, but also hybrid or even face-to-face courses, perhaps in concert with classroom discussions. It's worth at least considering how you might experiment with this mode of conversation in your classes. You may need to experiment with different variations of them. But for a lot of professors, students, and classes, they offer real potential to support learning and foster teaching and social presence. In the next episode, part 2 of our look at asynchronous discussions, we'll look at more practical tips for managing discussions in your class. Thank you for listening to the Canisius Pedagogy Primer podcast. Once again, all relevant links can be found in show notes. For more resources, check out canisius.edu/Kali or find us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube.